In a world full of distractions, there is one big question on every dog owner's lips.
How do I become more than just the person holding the other end of the leash?
We all get dogs with a dream in mind, a vision of the future. And if right now your everyday reality isn't quite that picture you had in mind, you are in the right place.
It really doesn't have to be this way.
You absolutely can and will be more to your dog than just the person who gets in between them and the world.
The key is you need to be more sexy.
More sexy than the neighbourhood cat.
More sexy than the jogger in the park.
More sexy than that half-eaten hamburger they just found on the floor.
And yes, even more sexy than the dog across the road.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Lauren.
Together we're Absolute Dogs.
And you're listening to the Sexier Than a Squirrel podcast.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Sexier Than a Squirrel podcast, the podcast that teaches you how to transform your struggles and turn them into strengths.
Now, we're talking labels, and we're talking today labels that someone else may place on your dog, and equally you may place them on your dog and you may keep them, or you may, you know what, they're troublesome. And I'm going to give you a quick story. And Poppy, my late Border Collie, she lived for almost 17 years. She was an amazing dog. And very early on in her life, she had a few labels stuck on her, largely because we misunderstood her, and largely because I would say a lot of other trainers misunderstood her too. So she had labels like dog aggressive, reactive, absolutely fearful reactivity. She had resource guarding, like lots of really sort of chase-driven labels, and actually nasty, like nasty, plain nasty. And you know what? Now, knowing all the brilliant things that we do through the Gamechanger community and the community we work in, I wish I could have her all over again. And I really do. I wish I could have her again, because I now know that those labels should have been ripped off to help our training and to help our journey.
Absolutely. And, you know, we're in a new year now, so it's like new year, new start. And
Happy New Year.
Sometimes what we can find ourselves doing is taking the labels from the previous year into the next year, and we're like, okay, new start. But actually, it's not a new start. And so what we wanted to do is dedicate an entire episode to actually why you need to rip the labels off, how you can rip them off, and why it's so important to do so.
And I think the first step of this, and our first sort of stage, is to be aware of them. Yeah. So actually acknowledge them. And sometimes these come to you in a really sort of subtle, and I'll be honest, a little bit naughty way. So someone might say, oh yeah, she's a little bit mean there, isn't she? Or they might put a little word in that sort of has a tone to it and a ring to it, and you kind of go, I don't think you're being kind there, were you? And I think sometimes these labels sort of happen without us, almost they're a little bit seamless, and suddenly they're attached. And this might be a dog trainer, this might be a friend, it might be a family member, it might be your daughter, your mother, and it can come in lots of different ways. And it might be as simple as, oh, he's a bit needy, but actually there is a label that comes alongside that, and there's a tone, right?
Absolutely. And you know, an example might be, for example, I don't know, your dog has the label of somebody has said that they're vindictive, right? They're doing things on purpose.
Stubborn.
Or they're stubborn. And let's say the label of he's stubborn. Well, then you ask your dog to do something.
So let's say you're in the park, you recall them,
and they don't come back. Now, if you've got the label on your dog of being stubborn, well, they have just purposefully ignored you.
They made that intentional decision to almost stick two fingers up. They were rude.
They were rude. They were vindictive.
How very
they were
obnoxious.
Stubborn.
How obnoxious.
And the reality is that if we get rid of that frame, well, maybe they're in an arousal level that means that they can't even hear your recall.
Maybe it was a difficult choice. Like the same for me. We were in a restaurant the other day and someone said, do you want dessert? I found it hard to disengage from the idea of that.
Maybe.
Like, it's a hard choice.
Exactly. Maybe they don't have the skills to be able to do that in that environment.
Maybe you as their trainer and the leader of their learning haven't taught them that level yet.
Maybe in this situation, actually, now that we've changed the frame, you're not the victim in this situation. Actually, they are.
Dun, dun, dun.
And so you see how a label can lead to a whole cascade of choices.
And it's actually very disempowering for the owner, for the dog, and for everyone around. And actually is the one thing we find in the world is people love to get hold of a problem. And actually, this problem can spiral and it can go out of control. And this whole label can be a thing.
Absolutely. And so then you start to think about the cascade of choices that happens in those two exact same situations, but they each have got a different frame, different labels on the dog. Well, the first situation where the dog's vindictive and mean, well, that's it. I'm going to capture you. I'm going to run after you, rugby tackle you, put you on lead, and you are going to be punished. You are not going to the park for another 2 weeks, and I'm going to put you in timeout when we get home, right? Do you think that is going to make your dog want to be near you in the future?
I mean, it's really not dissimilar to when I grew up. My dad was very much the mindset that if a dog had an accident, you would try and rub their nose in it. And it's not dissimilar to that mindset. And yet, for me, even as I must have been, I don't know, 9, 10, 11, Liza's age, I knew very clearly that was bad.
Yeah.
Like, that was wrong.
Yeah.
Like, there was nothing right or logic about that.
Nobody, no human does these things because they're evil or mean or whatever else, or they enjoy doing it. It's the frame with which they first approach this. And the frame is created from the labels and the language that we use around describing our dogs. And so, in terms of the why, well, let's think about the second scenario where we actually don't have those labels on our dogs, and we're seeing that our dogs are the victim of this situation. We've asked them to do something, they don't have the skills, their brain is saying computer says no, and they physically can't do it, right? What happens then? Well, we think to ourselves, okay, that's information. We go away from that environment, we teach them the skills, that grows their relationship with us, it grows their skills in loads of different situations and environments. We go back to that environment and they rock it, and they can do it time and time again.
So an example of that with Poppy was if she was on a lead and someone threw a chuck it ball thrower, she would go insane. Like, she'd be at the end of her lead, and if she couldn't get to the end of her lead and really sort of focus on the dog, she would come back up the lead biting it. Now, ultimately, we were putting her into a situation that her brain and her training had not prepared her for, and she did not have those skills. So in hindsight, whereas at the time we were told she's a difficult dog, she's this, she's that, she's
jealous,
the other,
she's vindictive,
and she's a dog who's got real major FOMO and really needs to learn some behaviour and just improve that behaviour. Like, she's really quite an aggressive dog on that lead. What we actually needed to do was take her away from the scenario. Instead, what the trainer said is, with this aggressive dog, what you need to do is keep patterning and putting her in these situations, and we will put dogs in front of her, and you need to get her to lie down, and you need to tell her no, and you need to use spray cans and all these different things. And the reason that we want to tell you this is because we don't want any other dog to go through that. No dog or relationship is lost. And yet, I'll be honest, I think Poppy's was pretty fragile. And she really got to a point that we tried everything because we were desperate. And so we understand if you feel desperate, and we understand if you feel that there's a label on your dog for a reason because you don't know what to do. But actually, number one, rip that label off, and let's think about, can we prepare our dogs better for the situations that they and the circumstances that they find themselves in? Because I don't think for any reason Poppy wanted to find herself in a town centre with someone throwing a chuck-it ball. I don't think she would have chosen that it was like we'd put her in a situation that was so not her, and yet then put her on a lead and then stopped her getting to it. Frustrated the hell out of her.
You recalling her in that situation, right, of on the beach, chuck it, throw her, she would have actually been grateful if she could have been recalled and could have come away from it, because that wasn't a happy place. That would have been a relief, but she didn't have the skills to be able to do it. And you see how, a slight change in frame, and there's a whole cascade of choices and decisions that happen.
The emotion changes. Like, for me, when I first came around to thinking about it, I felt so guilty. I felt so very guilty for all of those times that we put Poppy into a situation that she really couldn't handle. And yes, by trainers' advice, and yes, by other people telling us, but ultimately she couldn't handle it. And so even though a trainer had said to us to do that, don't think out there, game changers, that you can't say this isn't right for my dog right now. You are your dog's best advocate, and actually rip the labels off, and then let's train the dog in front of us.
And there is no better time to do it than right now.
New year,
new start. And so this is why we want to do this episode, because what we want you to do is sit down, take a moment to think about what frame are you approaching your dog training through right now? What words and language do you find yourself using to describe your dog? If you were describing your dog to us right now, how would you describe them?
So I was walking in the training arena yesterday, Tom, and this one made me a little bit sad because I said to the lady as I walked in, she was having a training session, and I said to her, oh, your dog is absolutely gorgeous. And she said, oh, I didn't want him. He's a rescue. He's really stubborn, really naughty. And actually, I don't really even like him. And I was like taken back by this because it's not the sort of game changer I'm used to here. Like I really was a bit like, oh, okay. And I was like, he's not a rescue. He's your dog. Like you're really lucky. She said, well, you might think that, but I definitely don't. And I was like, oh, I wouldn't want to be her trainer this morning. And I kind of like merrily shuffled past and kind of carried on my day because I thought I'm not going to let that impact me because I really have a lot to be doing of my own today. And so I did carry on. I asked the trainer how they got on and everything did go okay. She'd had a bad start to the day. Ultimately, the language that she was using was not helping her. Yeah. Like nobody, when you get in that state, it's actually not a nice place to be. And she really did take me back because I was like ready in Gamechanger land and she was definitely not ready for Gamechanger land. Yeah. But the language she was using, he's a rescue, he's a pain, he's stubborn, he annoys me, I don't like him, my husband doesn't like him, he's a difficult dog to own, actually he's not a dog I really want.
And the interesting thing is in her having that frame, and we've all had that frame at times, I mean maybe not that extreme, but
it was extreme. I was not expecting it.
We've all had a little flavour of that frame, right? But in doing that, when a dog was doing something great, right? When all the things that her dog was doing great in that moment, and Lauren said, what a beautiful dog.
And he was gorgeous.
Right? And he was behaving himself because she was looking at her dog through that frame. She couldn't see the wins. She could only, and when she did see the wins, she put it down to a fluke. She was like, oh yeah, but give it 5 minutes and it'll be a different picture because you've got that frame of your dog's vindictive. Your dog's out to get you, they're out to embarrass you. And so what we want you to do is we want you to, really do a bit of a reflection on how have you been describing your dog? What language have you been using? What labels have maybe been put on by you or other people? And let's rip them off. Let's think about actually what would be an empowering way to describe our dogs? What would really make us feel great? What would bounce into training?
Super words. What would be there? So if I think about Tokyo, I think energy, I think vibrant, I think handsome, I think beautifully built, I think massive expressive ears, I think soft eyes, I think kind, playful, fun, goofy. Like you can see how they just roll off the tongue. Like I adore everything about him. And yet, yes, he counter surfs. It's very annoying. He doesn't always do everything I want him to do, but that's not what I focus on. Yeah. I focus on the do land. I focus on what we can do. And I rip any labels off that anyone might have put on him before. Yeah. They certainly don't serve me or him well.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then what we want you to think about is actually, what is your dog owning dream? Like, where do you want to go? What would be like the dream at the, let's say at the end of this year, we're having a catch up in 365 days time. And we're saying to you, where are you now? Because I think sometimes what also happens is that where you are today is very different from where you are a year ago, right? And yet we still continue to treat our dogs as that dog from a year ago.
By using those empowering words, that's how we move ourselves towards the place we want to be.
And then now that we're in this new place, now we've got to set like a new goal. We've got to reestablish the vision. We've got to get some clarity on how we want our future to look. And then day by day, 1% improvement by 1% improvement, we're going to move towards it. But you need clarity in the present and clarity in the future, and you will move that.
And who's feeling excited? Who's feeling energized? Who is feeling good after hearing that? Because I'm feeling pretty pumped, pretty empowered, pretty excited to be able to do this for my dog family. Yeah. And I think this is really important that we take this energy away. I can feel your energy, podcast people. I can feel that you're loving the idea of doing this. This is a movement.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that, guys, you are the very best dog owner your dog could ever, ever, ever wish for. Let's rip those labels off.
Let's get powerful with our language. Let's get intentional about what we say. Let's really move ourselves to a better energy space.
And let's see you next time in the next episode. And in the meantime, remember, stay sexy. Hey, before you go, have you taken part in the worldwide Sexier Than a Squirrel Challenge?
It's a 25-day online video program, huge energy, amazing community, and over 6,000 people are already taking part.
The The only question is, you know where you are today. Where do you want to be 25 days from now? Head to absolutedogs.me/sexy.